Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Excellent.
Ça parfait. Merci. Okay. Hello, Angela, can you also hear me and see the slide as well?
Yeah, it seems good. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. No. Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Okay, perfect. Merci. Okay, now we just need to launch. Oh. I'm not moving. Ah, ok. Yeah. Je sais pas. Ok. Non. Ouais. En tout cas, je dois prendre le micro.
Non, ça marche. Il y a un résolument sur le micro. Tu entends? C'est ça, c'est ça.
Ok.
On va utiliser ça, c'est ça.
Ok.
Allô?
Ok. And this is for you.
C'est excellent.
Ouais, j'entends plus rien.
Non, on a juste en train pour commencer. Je ne sais pas qui c'est le président. Ok, fine.
Ouh là là.
So, good morning, everyone. We are here for the PhD defense of Lukas STIPPEL. So my name is Giovanni Neia. I am a researcher at Miria nearby. So the jury today is composed by the two reviewers, who are Professor Jalal Kazempur from the Technical University of Denmark, Emeritus Professor Gérard Memy from Telecom Paris, and then the other member of the jury are Carla Silva Gonçalves, researcher at UNESCO in Portugal, Professor Angela Meyer from the University of Bern, myself, the researcher Fei Teng from the Imperial College of London, Simone Kamal, who is also one of the supervisors chargé de recherche here at Mines Paris, and finally George Kariniotakis, who is a research director here at Mines Paris. So I leave the floor to the candidate. As you know, you have 45 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President, for the introduction. And yes, welcome to my PhD defense on my PhD thesis, Privacy and Confidentiality Preserving Data Sharing Methods for the Optimization of Multi-Actor Energy Systems. I'm Lukas STIPPEL, and my thesis was supervised by George Kariniotakis and Simon Kamal. First, the outline. We are going to start with the introduction and objectives. Then first we're going to discuss our first contribution, a framework for collaborative privacy-preserving data sharing in energy systems. Then we are going to continue with the first methodological approach, federated, resilient trees encrypted via secret sharing. And then we're going to discuss the ideas of trustworthy encryption with federated learning via fusion CAN. Lastly, we are going to discuss how we can extend beyond the classical fully encrypted setting in energy systems. And then we're going to conclude. So now to the introduction. First, if we look at the idea of decarbonization, there are two major driving forces. First, the energy transition and the digitalization of energy systems. If you look at the energy transitions, power systems evolve towards a high number of distributed assets, for example, renewables, EV charging stations, and they are dominant in energy systems. Power systems themselves consider electricity, meanwhile energy systems consider all forms of energy. Then if we look, we have the emergence of multiple actors at different levels with different interests, for example, community managers. And then if we look at the smallest level, now, as we have smart meters, the deployment shifts from a classical only consumer household to a prosumer, for example, with a local photovoltaic or an electric vehicle. On the other side, individual assets now produce large amounts of data we can actually use for machine learning. If we consider the data in industry, it's usually confidential, for example, due to competitive advantages. Then if we look at the individuals, the general data protection regulation imposes privacy constraints for data. Hence, our challenge is to unlock the value from the distributed data in energy systems under the above main confidentiality and privacy concerns. So the question is, why do we want to do this? Why are we interested in it? Here, a classical example, spatial temporal forecasting. Pardon? Perfect. Okay, so if we here look at the wind farm, we can see that we have three neighboring wind farms who want to use the observations from the other wind farms. The idea is to use the information, for example, to infer changes in wind speed. How does it work? We consider in a forecasting model the inputs of each different farm, which utilizes the different observations from the past time steps to produce a forecast using a forecasting model. Why is it interesting for us? Because the forecasting accuracy can increase up to 20% for intraday horizons. So we want to leverage the advantage in accuracy. This is not only possible for intraday forecasting, but rather also for other applications in energy systems. For example, we have joint decision-making in industrial busing, virtual power plants, and residential flexibility. However, we have the issue that the data might belong to different owners, less privacy and confidentiality constraints. This, for example, in the first three cases, is the industrial secret. When you consider the second, the third, and fourth case, we have personal data constraints. So the question is, how can optimization approaches, for example, through machine learning or forecasting, leverage this information? Examples is higher accuracy, less CO2 emissions, or less penalties. This motivates our first question. How do we Okay, this motivates the first question, where we have different parties who are willing to share. So how do we arrive at the privacy preserving data sharing? So we need a model which is somehow joined, then our intermediate information should be encrypted. Meanwhile, the data and the forecasts stay local. And the key questions we need to ask ourselves are the following. First, governance. So how do we actually design the data sharing optimally? And then for the model, what machine learning models can we use? How can they provide criteria such as accuracy or interpretability? Then for the encryption, what is the impact of the encrypted method we have chosen? How does it affect our machine learning model? How do we need to encrypt all data? And then lastly, we need to attribute value, meaning how do we design a process that on one side measures the value of data sharing and on the other side attributes the value to the people who contributed to our data sharing scheme. This led to the objective of my thesis, to develop a holistic, resilient, and trustworthy approach for collaborative, privacy-preserving data sharing in energy systems, where accuracy and decision quality are critical. We ask ourselves the following research questions in my thesis. The literature on data sharing is fragmented. Hence, can we develop a framework for predictive privacy-preserving data sharing, collaborations, and energy systems? And how do we design a nonlinear, non-parametric, decentralized privacy-preserving model? Can we address the seeming contradiction of interpretability and privacy? And lastly, if we always look at fully encrypted settings for forecasting, how can we extend these to incorporate different privacy levels and different loss functions? Those are the 4 research questions. Now, we continue for a framework for collaborative privacy-preserving data sharing. The question is, why do we need a framework? If we look at the literature is fragmented for federated learning. For example, there are a lot of articles in medicine, computer science, finance, and power systems. So you need to find the techniques which suit you. Governance questions, such as the type of data sharing or who are the actors, are usually simplified or assumed. Lastly, the focus, as normal in research, is either on the machine learning part itself or on some specific type of the data set. However, if we compare in the requirements for real-world applications, we want to have guidelines to make these decisions and choose between different options for each step, for the governance, for the model, for the encryption. However, the data we have in our collaboration also shapes our decisions, such as data paucity or the heterogeneity, which leads to our first contribution, which is a comprehensive top-down framework to guide decisions for data sharing. So now we look at the first 2 layers. As you can see, in orange is the state of the art, and in blue is what we did in my thesis. For the data owners, we have a public data owner, which means non-sensitive available data, and active data owners. So they have an input and also receive an output. In the governance layer, you have to make decisions such as feature selection, where you select which features, in our case, we assume known features. Then the security assumption, which means how do the actors behave. In our cases, we assume semi-honesty, which means data owners will follow and execute the protocol as defined. However, they will try to infer as much information on the intermediate messages and on the messages they receive. Next, we discuss our question, how do we choose an archetype for data sharing? What do we need? Here we first look at the first common type of data sharing by samples, called horizontal federated learning. Here the key idea is that you have the same feature space, but different sample spaces, which means, for example, if you look at the forecasting model, now you aggregate samples. Before we saw each input has different features from different data owners. In this case, we have different samples. The key usage is if data paucity exists or you require a global model, for example, for a new site. Key applications of interest in energy systems on one side is if you have data paucity and protect with differential privacy the identity of the users, for example, for voltage forecasting, if you want to use the global model to predict new sites, or if you have trained a global model, then you fine-tune the global model similar to pre-trained large neural networks on the custom data sets of your clients. However, for the use cases in the thesis I cover, there's neither data paucity nor the need for a global model. So this type of data sharing doesn't reflect our use case. Hence, we look at sharing features, the other approach, which is vertical federated learning. Here we have a shared global machine learning model where you share the same sample space and you have different data feature spaces. The idea here is if different information is needed, that means you want to utilize the information of different data owners. The final model, therefore, is a joint machine learning model of each participant, and you rely on the information of possible all actors, not necessarily. Possible issues are if you have a univariate model that the active party, so who's receiving the output, might have an information advantage. And if you have a joint machine learning model, if data is missing at some of the data owners, it will impact the model. Key points of interest here is, for example, lossless encrypted models, or if you can dynamically allocate the tasks during the learning process. If we look at our thesis, vertical federated learning represents the natural fit as this in spatial-temporal forecasting. Now we move towards the models. Here we need to select a model. The model needs to depend on the desired properties we have defined in our governance layer. So, for example, if we say our model should be accurate and interpretable, we should select model types which reflect these properties. In the thesis, we have chosen to focus on accuracy, interpretability, and robustness. Therefore, we have identified tree-based networks, tree-based methods, and Kolmogorov-Arnold networks to be suitable to our approach. It is important to note, as you can see, for these methods already all different kinds of encryption exist. So now we can later on select the method of encryption which suits our needs, which we're going to discuss now in the subsequent layers. Here, we first have the encryption layer. So now we recall we have in the governance layer decided how our data sharing is going to function. We have selected an appropriate model, and now we need to choose an encryption which fits these two prior decisions so that we achieve our result. Lastly, in the evaluation and improvement layer, you measure and verify the value we have generated, for example, by using metrics. And lastly, you can make a pass backwards after your evaluation and modify the choices you've made previously to achieve better results if desired. For the encryption, we need to choose a suitable encryption. This, as said, depends on the use case. Here are 4 common approaches for encryption. One is transformation, which means the data is transformed in some form. This can be naturally included in machine learning methods. Depending on your application, you need to reverse it later. One of the most common and popular techniques is differential privacy. Differential privacy can be applied at different stages. You can apply it directly to the data, or you can apply it, for example, in differential horizontal learning, you can apply it to the gradients. A key strength of it is it's mathematically proven, so it can provide a privacy guarantee also for how many steps. You can use it for different levels. However, you add random noise to your data. So on one side, it can affect accuracy. On the other side, it also can affect interpretability if you add noise to your data. Another type of encryptions are homomorphic and secret sharing approaches. They are applied to operations. I group them together because the strengths, they are lossless and they do not affect the data, are shared by both. Also, one of the common weaknesses is that both of them struggle with nonlinear operations, which is key, for example, in tree-based methods or neural networks. Lastly, look at decomposition. Decomposition has the idea, okay, I have a distributed problem, so I might as well decompose my global problem into local subproblems and solve them independently. And therefore, I do not need to share the data I've already. This improves speed, usually fits the natural distribution of distributed data. However, commonly it is not privacy preserving in itself, so you need to use some other method in combination. In the thesis, we use transformation in combination with decomposition and secret sharing in combination with decomposition. Here, the key concept is that you can also combine encryption techniques to achieve the desired results. This now leads us to the assessment. Okay, we have now decided how we data share, we have a model, and we have encrypted it and received an output. Now we need to assess the value. So on one side, we need to evaluate the effect of the privacy and encryption. So do we actually gain a benefit in forecasting or in revenue, for example, in trading? Then what is our definition of success? Do we need an overall positive value, or do we need a positive value for all participants? Meaning, does everyone need to profit? It's a very important distinction to define success. Lastly, if we have value, we need to attribute the value. Why do we get value? Who produced value? Here, 2 common methods are interpretability, which means the ability to inherently understand the model. Where challenge is, okay, I encrypt my model, I encrypt the data to protect information can I use interpretability methods without revealing the subsequent data or information below? Or on the other hand, if I look at explainability, where the idea is, okay, I now explain why my model arrived at a certain prediction based on the outputs. Similarly, if I apply a post-hoc model to my encrypted model, do I lose privacy or not? This is a key question you need to answer. So the challenge you have in your choices is to evaluate and attribute value while preserving privacy. And after you have done this, you could perform a backpass and modify your choices depending on your assessment. And this is a pass through our framework, which we will perform multiple times later on to explain how we arrive at our methodological contributions. So in conclusion, the framework focuses for real-world application. It should provide guidelines for designing collaborations. And in the focus on energy systems, the attempt is to unify the literature, therefore provide different options from different applications. And especially we consider the governance layer and therefore the associated questions. And this now leads to our first methodological contribution, which is a peer-to-peer federated resilience trees encrypted via secret sharing. As promised, we will now pass through the framework to explain our choices. If you look at the owners, we have active data owners. Each owner has an input and an output. Then we have public data. For the governance layer, as said, we use vertical federated learning, the semi-honest assumption, and our features as known. Now for the model, we wanted a nonlinear model, which should be robust, decentralized, and should be able to capture non-parametric relationships. If you look at the available model types, the model we have identified are tree-based approaches. Considering the encryption, we want a lossless encryption. Its accuracy is our key metric. It should be computationally cheap and decentralized. Method which could be adapted is secret sharing. In the evaluation, we have a deterministic evaluation. We want accuracy and resilience. Hence, our contribution is multivariate peer-to-peer federated trees. Now, why do we decide for trees? We look at federated trees in the state of the art. First, secure-boost is a very common method. It is univariate, however, it has a multivariate extension, and secret sharing based approach is univariate. When considering encryption and speed, we can see for homomorphic encryption, it is computationally expensive. Hence, secret sharing, additive secret sharing specifically, can be up to 7 times faster than the secure boost method. Then we discussed nonlinear operations. When looking at the encryption methods, the solutions here is either to perform it unencrypted or to perform a combination of nominators and denominators with an equal denominator, which is slow. If you look at the key gaps in secure boost, the active party is information advantage, and secret sharing requires a central coordinator, which might not fit our use case. Therefore, our contribution will be multivariate and decentralized with encrypted division. So, do multivariate trees fit our approach? Can we use them? Here, the multivariate nature gives 3 key properties. First, you have a simultaneous prediction, meaning if you have a multivariate tree, you can make a prediction for all data owners at the same time. Then they're proven to be able to generalize better than univariate counterexamples, and you have 1 weight per party. What does this mean? If you look at the green leaf, we can see that the loss function is a matrix which has to be inverted, which commonly would produce a computational issue. However, for example, with common loss function, like the RMSE or binary cross and free, it's separated by active party, and we get a diagonal matrix. Why is this interesting? So, what is the natural fit for privacy-preserving data sharing? First, we have 1 global model for all parties. Then you have information parity. In our approach, all data owners are active, so everyone receives an output and possibly participates. Then, if we look at the weights, and you can see here, I purchased the laser pointer is not working. Maybe, yes. Okay, as you can see here, in the J, this is only dependent on the data owner who owns this weight entry of the vector. Therefore, if you give them the unencrypted nominator and denominator, they can store them locally and unencrypted, and nobody else has ever access to the weight prediction themselves, and it will never be shared. Hence, multivariate gradient boosted trees naturally suit our requirements. Now the question is, what do we need to encrypt then in our data sharing approach? The critical operations are the following. First, histogram-based splitting. In a tree, at a node, for example, with training samples here, the instance space is split left or right. And this is sensitive because it might reveal distributive information about the data distribution and the feature who's providing the split. Then if you look at the gain equation, we can see here similar again. We have a gradient and Hessian, which is sensitive. The data owner M does not want to share the gradient and the Hessian to everyone else. Then the instance space is also sensitive, as just discussed. And furthermore, as you can see here, division is necessary, which is a nonlinear operation as discussed before. Hence, the instance space, the gradient, and Hessian need to be encrypted. And we should be able to perform encrypted division, which leads to our proposed encryption, which is a two-step approach. First, we want to combine secret sharing with randomization. Here you see the fraction. And then if we look at secret sharing, additive secret sharing, it fulfills the basic math properties. This means I have the associative, commutative, and distributive law. You cannot perform division. However, you can perform addition and multiplication. This usually requires an owner, which is the central party commonly. But in our case, we assign the owner who owns the gradient and the Hessian to be the coordinator. Therefore, peer-to-peer is possible, as they never want to share their data and therefore will not collude. And lastly, randomization is simply randomizing with random factor. This leads to the following proposed encrypted division. First, you encrypt and multiply T with A and B. So now you have two randomized encrypted values. Then you can decrypt the randomized TB at the owner of B. Hence, you can compute the multiplicative inverse. And then you can encrypt it again and perform encrypted multiplication. And therefore, you have performed direct division, solely multiplication, and do not need any circumvention. This was evaluated on the GEFCOM case studies for the trees on 4 farms. We use a sliding window approach, which means 12 months of training, 1 month of prediction. We use common evaluation metrics. So first, we look at the improvement with the encrypted linear state of the art, including NWP data and not NWP data. As you can see on the left-hand side in the RMSE, trees at later horizon and if when you include NWP data are able to outperform the benchmark. Of interest is the following. If you look at the MAE, you can see that the leftover outperforms the tree when you do not include nonlinear data. Hence, we assume this is due to the loss function as it's optimized on the RMSE and probably oscillates around the true values. Hence, our proposed model outperforms the benchmarks. Now, the additional requirements we proposed in our walkthrough through the framework are losslessness and resilience. So those also need to be verified, which we do here. First, on the left-hand side, you can see the lossless verification. As you can see here in the loss curve comparing the unencrypted version of SketchBoost versus our encrypted tree model, you can see it is lossless. On the right-hand side, we compared what happens if one farm is missing due to, for example, an export cable not working and you don't have your observations available. How do trees are able to handle this if you, for example, choose natively always to go left on your trees? And losslessness and resilience have been verified, which leads us to our conclusion for multivariate federated trees. First, we can perform division directly by multiplication. It is a multivariate approach, and this is suitable to different loss functions as long as they are additive separable. Furthermore, for DAR forecasting, it is a decentralized process. We can capture nonlinear relationships. It is non-parametric, and we could confirm the native ability of trees to withstand missing data. This is the first model. Now, we look at different desired properties for federated learning. In trustworthy encryption is federated learning via fusion kern. Once again, we pass through a framework to define our criteria we want to fulfill in our application. The governance layer stays the same. However, now for the model, we want to utilize a model which is nonlinear and interpretable and uses a neural network architecture, meaning you can do batch learning and online learning. The model architecture we have identified are Kolmogorov ANA networks, short CAN. Here for the encryption, we have the following desires. Once again, it should be lossless. Then we do not want to add an additional burden to the model itself, and we want to leverage the natural CAN architecture. Therefore, the methods we have identified to be suitable are fusion and projection. Then, in the evaluation now, we have an interpretable model, so we not only evaluate accuracy, but also interpretability and verifiability. Hence, the contribution is a multivariate trustworthy fusion CAN. First, what are CAN? Here's a comparison to MLP. On the left-hand side, you have an MLP, and on the right-hand side, you have a CAN. As you can see, for MLPs, it is known the edges are linear functions, so they're simple trainable, and the activation function is complex. For example, the ReLO function, which is commonly a problem if your encryption method struggles with nonlinear functions. On the other hand, the CANs invert the principle. Here you have a complex trainable spline, and the activation function is a sample summation. I recall, which is of importance later, you can write a spline also as a vector multiplication. Then, okay, now we have a can. How does the can learn? A can learns similar to an MLP via backpropagation. As you can see in the GIF, these splines are updated after a pass-through based on the gradients, and then you receive an updated curve. The initialization is also via random points. So now we have a running can. The next question is encryption. How do I encrypt? Here we want to employ the following underlying principle. If you look at the following function, these two f's map both to 3. So if I show you 3, you're not able to decipher from which output it comes if you don't have any additional information. Hence, the idea is if I have a not injective function, I cannot have a bijection. Bijection means I can construct a unique inverse. So I don't have a unique inverse, and therefore I can have possibly an infinite combination of origins. This is the underlying principle, how we want to project data. How does it look in a visual concept for fusion? In a joint fusion model, you first have a local model which pre-processes the data, and in our case, projects into a lower dimensional space, and can do this 2 times, first in a network architecture, and then naturally, a can takes a multivariate input and maps it to a univariate output. Hence, each data owner first has a local can, where they embed into lower dimensional space before connecting to the fully connected can. Conceptually, we look at the following, which is a adaptation of the proof of FatBCD, who had this idea for late fusion MLP. First, we recall a vector formulation. And now, what does it mean to protect the output? The question we need to ask ourselves, can X be restored if I see phi of X every iteration I pass through my network? This is our key question. And the goal is, we want to show, or prove rather, that phi of X have come from an infinite number of combinations of omega and X, and therefore you cannot restore the true value, or you do not know that you have the true value if you take a guess. And most importantly, the number of combinations does not reduce over time, because otherwise you could just have an infinite number of training steps or observe the predictions and make decisions. So a key thing you need to prove is that this number actually does not reduce over time. The proof is via induction and in my manuscript in the appendix. And now we have an encrypted fusion can. The next question is, okay, how do I provide interpretability and verifiability while preserving privacy? Because now we don't want to lose our privacy we have just gained. And first, in theory, how do can provide interpretability? If you look at this conjugate of other networks, it doesn't look interpretable at all because you have a large mass of splines. The first step in the interpretability pipeline of can is you prune, which means using, for example, the L1 norm, you remove not necessary nodes and edges. For fusion can, you can technically employ different thresholds for the local can and the fully connected can later on. Then you do perform symbolic fitting. What does this mean? This means that you fit the splines to a symbolic function which represents your data. This can be possibly fine-tuned. Voila, what do we get? We get a symbolic function. So in this case, e to the power of minus x plus x squared cubed. This has 2 important properties. It is continuous, and we also realized our input data is compact, so close and bounded. What does it mean? If we now move to the evaluation layer in our framework, we can see the following. First, common for can, you have the interpretability, which is partial derivatives, where you can now attribute the value or what happens if x1 changes to our functions. Then, what we spotted, we have a continuous input data, a compact input data space. We can use the extreme value theorem for compact spaces, which means if I have a bounded input, I also have a bounded output. And therefore we can provide output bounds for our network, which gives us bounds on our predictions later on. Hence our contribution is that we leverage the can interpretability pipeline also for verifiability and do this while preserving privacy. This is our key contribution. However, when you train can, there can be potential issues. Here, I want to discuss with you the pruning sensitivity. If you do not choose your pruning parameters well, you might delete on accident entire layers. And for example, here you see an example where on one side the pruning factor was 0.6 and then 0.2, and you can see a clear difference in the performance of the can. Similar things can happen with symbolic singularities or in training. So you need to choose your pruning parameters very carefully, and you can see in the training loss if you have or if you have not. It's very easy to spot. So now we move to our evaluation. First, we are still doing spatial temporal forecasting, hence we need to evaluate accuracy. Here we present the benchmark against state-of-the-art models, and we compare our fully connected CAN and fusion CANs. On the left-hand side, you see spatial temporal forecasting. On the right-hand side, you see the combined forecast with the entropy. First, we can see that especially the fusion CAN are competitive with the state-of-the-art. Why is this important? Because recall we have an interpretable model. Now we can use, for example, the argument of Rudin, which says if you have a white box model which is competitive, always choose the white box model in comparison to the black box model. And there are many similar argumentations in interpretable machine learning, but the key is you need competitive performance, which we have achieved. Then the biggest benchmark is other neural network architectures, which is often discussed. In our cases, with the basic MLP, this performance is equal. Furthermore, of importance, we do have the interpretability when we prune and do symbolic fitting. And as you can see, symbolic fitting and pruning does not reduce the accuracy. And now the second case, we promised interpretability, verifiability. For the interpretability, I present you the following. The idea is, okay, I now have to evaluate how do my symbolic functions change if I change the input. What we did, we generated random data independently, so there's no privacy being lost when I receive these outputs. I do not reveal distributions of my true on data. Then we evaluate the sensitivity of the symbolic functions. We have continuous functions, so we can have and construct nice derivatives. Well, the method we use is derivative-based global sensitivity measures, which is the expected value of the squared partial derivatives. The inputs you see here are the outputs of the local fusion counts, because you do not see the original information, but rather what does each data owner provide. Key observations you can see for the spatial temporal use case is that every farm continues. Farms are leveraging the information of other farms, and it is an inherent property. This leads us to our conclusion for fusion CAN. First, for the proposed fusion method, it is encryptionless. It is suitable for different CAN architectures. So, for example, Chebyshev counts, which has different properties could be utilized. And once again, it is suitable for different loss functions. While benchmark on the RMSE, you can replace with a different loss function. Furthermore, for the properties towards trustworthiness, we tick all three of them. It is privacy preserving, interpretable, and verifiable. So hence we have a first step towards trustworthy federated learning. Now we continue with the idea, okay, now we have discussed fully encrypted predictive settings. Can I change it? And one approach we want to discuss is mixed encryption. And afterwards, I want to discuss one contribution in chapter 5, which is the idea of imputing missing values. We start with mixed encryption. Currently, if you look at most federated learning in power systems, all inputs are encrypted. However, data might be publicly available. The date time is important. For example, for EVs or photovoltaic forecasting, the hour of the day is key, and also the day. The data is public. Everyone knows what hour of the day we have and what the weekday is. However, now actors can encrypt this public data and claim ownership. And then if you have an attribution scheme, they can be paid for this very important feature, which in truth is the hour of the day. Hence, this is not something we desire. Therefore, our idea was to mix privacy levels. And the proposal is that only sensitive inputs are encrypted. However, the public data is collected in a public actor. For example, the daytime, the temperature, etc. And we want to leverage mixed encryption. We show here the adaptation for the previous proposed federated tree model. All features and bins perform encrypted multiplications in a fully encrypted setting. If we move to the mixed encryption, we can see we have two types. First, sensitive and sensitive, and then sensitive and public multiplications. If you look at the public data on the left-hand side, you can see in a fully encrypted setting, the public data is assigned to some data owner, who are then technically the owner of the public feature because you don't know its identity. In the mixed encrypted case, you can see that the public feature is here in the public party, so it's clear where all public information is. And also, if you consider feature selection, this would mean if someone else encrypts a public feature, you would have a redundancy, and then you obviously would always choose the public feature because it's the cheaper feature and you don't need to attribute. Now we move to the evaluation of the mixed encryption. So first, on the left-hand side, we ask ourselves, do we get the same results if I have a mixed approach or not mixed approach? So is it the same? And as you can see, Here, the dashed line represents the error of the mixed encryption, and the axes are the not fully encrypted model. So it's the federated tree model, once using the mixed encryption function and once using the full encrypted function. As you can see, the errors are identical and the outputs are too. Then the second idea is, okay, now we have public features, so we have less mixed encryption. Is it actually beneficial, and this is more efficient? Here we compare the number of bins, so how large are the multiplications we have to perform, and as you can see, if you have large multiplications, mixed encryption becomes significantly more efficient. Hence, federated trees have been successfully extended to mixed encryption cases. This, for example, is also possible as fusion cases. Now we move to our second contribution, which is imputing missing values in a virtual power plant. Commonly, if you look at an intraday aggregator who acts on the electricity market, they can solve the problem centrally, which might be slow, have scalability issues, and the question is how to integrate new assets. When we move, the common approach in the literature is then to move to a distributed approach, commonly the augmented Lagrangian. Here, the key issue we want to address is that this is synchronous. This means if the ADM is running at each iterations due to the shared balancing constraint now in the objective of the Lagrangian, you need to exchange your updates. So if you want to compute L+1, you require each of the households step L, of the storage step L, and the bidding step L. Hence the solution to delays and failure of these steps. So if, for example, the storage doesn't provide their updates, is to impute. So to somehow find a value for these updates, which I will call theta. And because those updates are then used to make the trading decision. So how much electricity needs to be bought based on how much renewable energy I receive, what my storage situation looks, what the households consume, etc. So the question is now, how do I impute these values? One common approach in the literature is the last value approach or an autoregressive model. What we decide in the collaboration is to test the smart, predict, and optimize method. The key underlying principle here is that commonly a forecasting model is optimized for accuracy. And now the idea is, okay, what if we optimize our forecasting model not for the accuracy, but rather for the success of the subsequent decision, which is not the same. So what are our target and issues? First, we need to predict the ADMM update for the current iteration and therefore be able to be asynchronous. For example, if a household now can predict the updates of everyone else, they don't need to wait until they receive these updates. And therefore, you need the path data of each participant. This might cause a privacy issue between the households, as they might not want to reveal the data themselves. Here we now look at the training pipeline, how it works. And first, the past data is now fed to some form of forecasting model. The forecasting model then predicts the decisions or the solutions of everyone else. And these ADMM updates are then, except for the intraday, which can be solved analytically, fed into OpNet layer. The OpNet layer does two things. First, it calculates the decision based on our updates, and then it also calculates the decision based on the true information. So if you had the update, what have been the true solution for your trading problems? And then OpNet's key contribution is that they propose a way how to differentiate through these constraints, and there we receive separable gradients, which are then fed into the forecasting model, allowing us to train the forecasting model on the loss of the decision rather than whether the ADMM update was very accurate. In the case study, we can see that the renewable energy resources were trained for 4 months. Then we have 10 days of uninterrupted ADMMs, which are used to train the forecasting model. Then it's tested on 1 day. The scenarios are delay and failure. For the intraday market, our VPP interacts in 94 time periods, and therefore the model runs 94 steps. The goal is to maximize profit and utility, and for the influence on the price, the VPP is very small in comparison, and therefore is a price taker. The models are the following. Locally, one approach is that each asset has a DFL STM, which takes the last 5 steps of the average loads and the bidding decisions, and then predicts the next step in the sequence, which is one model. I said it's a sequence model. Then the other approach is for privacy preserving methods the GFL encrypted trees. Here you take the last step, perform a collaborative forecast for the next step, which means for each time step during the day, you have 94 models. Then if you look at the evaluation metrics, we compare the cost of the benchmark model versus the cost of the central solution. What I'm going to show you is the average over the 94 periods and the first 150 iterations of each ADMM run these 94 periods. On the left-hand side, you can see what happens if a subcomponent experiences a failure in the first 20 step, in the middle in the first 30, and then more of interest, what happens if a subcomponent stops reporting. Important in the evaluation, the storage imputation was not modeled, only the households and the intraday billing. The models benchmarked is the synchronous ADMM, the last value imputation, the autoregressive model, the DFL LSTM, and the DFL encrypted trees. What we can see in all methods is that both the DFL methods converge faster and to a lower error. Most interestingly is the part of the encryption of the failure, where you can see that both DFL methods are able to capture the relationships relatively well, while both other approaches are not able to. Hence, both proposed methods outperform the benchmark, but offer different benefits. In conclusion, for the mixed encryption, we have the same output as a fully encrypted model. The public features are revealed and it is more efficient. Then, if you look at imputing missing values, it allows an asynchronous ADMM, it increases privacy, and the DFL outperforms the benchmarks. This now leads to our conclusion of the whole work. First, we're going to conclude, then discuss the future directions, publications, and acknowledgements. Here, for the framework, we incorporate governance questions. So we discuss how do we design our data sharing first. Then we attempt to unify the literature by giving examples of possible choices you can make at each step. And we hope to provide guidance for real-world applications. Then if we consider peer-to-peer federated trees, it is a decentralized model. It is suitable for different loss functions as long as it is additive separable. And we perform division via multiplication and do not need any complex circumvention. Then if we consider the Fusion Common Government networks, they're encryptionless. It's the first steps towards trustworthy federated learning, and we allow direct interpretability. Considering the classic extensions, mixed encryption is efficient and lossless, and our privacy-preserving DFL models, or the privacy-preserving DFL model in form of the trees is competitive. For future directions for the framework, I would like to look more into in-depth for non-forecasting use cases, include a more rigorous security analysis in terms of cybersecurity, clarify the upslate structure, so what exactly can I change, and to possibly split the governance layer into the rules and technical questions. Then for vertical federated learning, the encryption-less approach could also possibly be applied to graph neural networks and diffusion models. Then for tree-based methods, online learning trees are very rare, and I think it would be of interest to extend the encrypted method to that. For secret sharing itself, I would like to lower the threshold and therefore be more communication resilient so that I can have multiple different pairs and move to a possible fixed point integer additive secret sharing for more efficiency. For the CAN, different CAN architectures, bounds are naturally suited to probabilistic forecasting and to include privacy-preserving corporal methods to have better bounds in the verifiability. For privacy-preserving DFL, leverage interpretable CAN methods to directly explain decisions, and Fusion is naturally supportive of mixed encryption. For the publications, one publication was already accepted, one submitted, one is in the process of being submitted, and one was being planned. I presented at, well, my work rather was presented at 5 conferences. And lastly, for the acknowledgement, my PhD was supported by the Stiftung of der Deutschen Wirtschaft, and it was part of the IA Energy project of the Partage project in France. My stay at Inesh Tech was in the frame of the towards encryption free federated learning for energy use cases, which was a challenge we got selected. And thank you very much for all collaborators and for the center. Thank you very much for listening. I'm interested in the questions.
Thanks for the presentation. Now I give the floor to the first reviewer, who is Professor Jalal Kazempur.
Thank you.
Jalal.
Lucas, thanks a lot for nice thesis and nice presentation. Actually, a lot of information you managed to provide us in 45-50 minutes now. I also enjoyed reading your thesis. It's a lot of nice work. So thanks for that, and congrats to you and also to your supervisors. Very nice and very timely topic. I have a few questions to you, Lucas. So I have about 20 minutes to ask a few questions. So you don't need to answer very long answers. I mean, it could be also short. Okay. So let's start a bit about the big picture. The big picture of the problem. First, have you had the chance to talk to industry or different people to see how they see your methods? Did you have a chance to interact with industrial partners?
There were discussions with Air Liquide, who cooperated often with our center, and there the use case for joint decision making in an industrial basin is the results of a challenge proposed by Air Liquide, and later on discussions we had with members of the research teams on how to perform privacy preserving structures, and there we discussed what key elements would be of interest we presented in our work.
Is there any specific case study or method that they saw the most applicability for their problem?
We didn't discuss, or the case would be, for example, industrial basin. We have different data owners who are legally not allowed to coordinate by revealing contracts, and therefore you would need, for example, a vertical model which can allocate scheduling decisions for the different usage of gas to coordinate the use of energy better to reduce the CO2 emissions.
Okay, fantastic, very nice. So another big picture question to you, Lucas, is that, well, you investigate a lot of different techniques for privacy and confidentially preserving. I'm sure that you know about also data market and data trading. I'm sure that, yeah, Carla, George, also they worked on that. But you always, how to say, keep your thesis in the layer of privacy preservation for data sharing. Where do you think the borderline, the line is, and saying, okay, the data privacy is not enough. We need to have an extra layer of trading. And then, for example, in your case study, you have some wind farms or a multiple of wind farms, then maybe they will really start sharing data with each other. So where do you see that line?
The line, in my opinion, the line is at the point of the value attribution and compensation. So if we engage in a data sharing, some people profit more than others, and some people contribute more. So the person who contributes more wants to be compensated to provide a benefit with a possible competitor. And therefore, you need to pay them for providing the data, which is, for example, done in the work at Energétiques with Carla, where you discuss, or for example, the Predico platform, where people pay for the information they receive. So I think you have two options. Either you use political or governance decisions to enforce data sharing, or you provide like an incentive. And data markets, in my opinion, might be an approach to provide an incentive for people to participate, to have an overall benefit with everyone having high accuracy, but also to allow positive benefits by being compensated for providing a competitor with free, better forecasts.
Very good. I mean, your answer is a perfect answer for my next question. It provides the basis. So actually, your methods, different data privacy preservation methods, can you remind us that whether everyone, for example, every wind farm benefits, and whether their benefit is proportional to how much value they are sharing?
Depends. For what I've
So is there a case that someone will be unhappy saying that, okay, I'm earning some benefit, but that benefit is not proportional to the value of data I shared?
Wait a second. Let me go back to the origin. This figure, I'm sorry, the farms might are a bit clustered, but here you can see that, for example, wait, you cannot see because you're
Yeah, if you use mouse,
this
yeah.
very tiny dot here is farm number 2. Farm number 2 is under the average performance of the accuracy. So the black bar represents the average, and farm 2, which is this dot, represents the accuracy for farm 2 for this horizon. Now, if we look, for example, this is a different horizon, but if we look at farm 2, we can see that other farms use the information of farm 2, especially farm 8. And therefore, farm 2 would be one of those examples you just gave.
So
where farm 2 doesn't profit as much, but provides a lot of benefit.
So what you're saying here, and that's a very nice example, actually. So you're saying that wind farm, farm 2 provides a lot of data to others, especially farm 8. So now both of them, they are kind of happy because it's better than not sharing, but the benefit is not proportional. And maybe farm 8 is earning more than, and while farm 2 is earning less than what it should earn. Is it what you're saying?
Yes, this is my example in this case, like that.
So are you saying that the privacy layer that you develop, it's essential, but on top of it, maybe the other PhD students should work on data market?
I think the next logical step is to include data markets with privacy preserving learning if compensation is a key factor. If, for example, aggregators decide to build an energy community with just the goal to have more precise forecasts for stability, then possibly no.
Okay, so I'm trying to make sure we are on the same page. So you're saying that in future we should have a data market, and one of the, how to say, modules inside data market should be your platform where the privacy is being preserved.
Yeah, this is a possible way. Yes, you could have a privacy preserving forecast integrated into a data market.
But then my question is, if we are going to have a data market, then why we do care about privacy? Then maybe farm 2 just directly share information with features with farm 8. Do we need privacy layer if we go for data market? And if we don't go for data market, just keeping it in the layer of data privacy, have to make sure that farm 2 is happy sharing data with farm 8. Am I clear?
I think so, yes. For the first question, if I understand you correctly, what if I can sell all data anyways? Why do I need privacy in a short
maybe farm 2 just directly share data, raw data, or broadcasting data with farm 8.
Yes, in my opinion, there are 2 reasons. First, contractual reasons. Farm 8 might not be allowed to share their data freely because
no, it's not freely. I mean, it's a data market.
Yeah, but they might not be allowed to share the unencrypted raw information of the wind turbines, for example. If we discuss critical infrastructure, there might be reasons that this data might not be freely revealed, and therefore you might need a privacy preserving model which allows you to participate in the data market, but the information still stays secure for critical infrastructure. For example, if locations, I'm not a critical infrastructure expert about like how it's
so maybe what you're saying is not really relevant to this example because farm 2's individual data is not really maybe sensitive, and maybe farm 2 can share its own individual forecast with farm 8 directly without adding privacy layer, you know?
Yes, for spatial temporal for this wind farm example, yes. I think a more basic example would be in medicine. Hospitals are not allowed to share the patient's data.
I see. Okay, let's move on. I have more questions to you. So later you talk about verifiability, which I agree that's very important. But it seems that you check verifiability by design. Don't you think that we need to also develop ex-post attack model, and then to see that, for example, in this case, whether farm 8 really manages to infer the raw data of farm 2 by just seeing noisy data or any kind of other private data for a while? Don't you think we need to develop another separate attack model to verify models, to Yeah.
You mean basically for me to understand, you mean a
Yeah,
second
for
layer?
example, think of inverse optimization method or Bayesian inference, saying that in this example, farm 8 for a long time manages to see data from farm 2. Of course, they are private data, maybe noisy data, maybe any other type of, not just the raw data. And just by seeing this data, maybe over time, maybe the smart person will learn what kind of algorithm exists there, and we managed to do reverse engineering and infer the raw data of farm 2. Don't you think we need kind of to develop such an attack model from farm 8's perspective to see if we really can do reverse engineer or not?
I agree with you that this cybersecurity analysis is very important when talking about higher technical readiness levels. We didn't consider this in this case, like I cut my line as I prove privacy and leave the text basically for future work. For the fusion can, which we discussed right now, the mathematical argument I would give you, I prove that there are always an infinite number of combinations, and therefore you can never guess the true value. However, you have domain knowledge, which would invite further investigation. Somebody will probably be able to find a method with proper cybersecurity and cryptanalysis methods to find something.
Okay, good. So let's talk a bit about the cost of privacy. I guess here, and then the baseline is that we just share data as they are without adding privacy. And I guess this cost of privacy depends on the downstream decision making, whether we are using for forecasting or for, I don't know, grid scheduling or whatever. So is there a true cost, the cost of privacy in dollars, in euro, or not?
That is, there's always a cost of privacy, but I would not say it's always negative. I would say because my baseline would not be data sharing unencryptedly, but not having data sharing. So privacy, for example, at one work they published in where they looked at local energy communities, where they showed by adding privacy, by adding noise, you gain higher accuracy by combining data sets. So the cost of privacy is a benefit for the whole community. So
I mean, when you added noise compared to raw data, you then make more suboptimal decisions. So there should be some cost there, right? Unless you also manage, also maybe you say that, okay, there is more privacy cost. So now by adding noise, they start sharing. Otherwise, I mean, you make more suboptimal decisions, no?
Yes, but I think I have it depends, but you have a different baseline. For example, I think my baseline is I don't compare non-encrypted data sharing versus encrypted data sharing. But if I do not use privacy, I have no data sharing. So I compare the data owner X for themselves, and then my privacy cost is: do I get a benefit if I engage in encrypted data sharing? If yes, then I would do it, and the trade-off is privacy. If no, I wouldn't do it.
So we are talking about different baseline, or I fully agree with that. But anyway, either then we have some cost or profit depending on the case. So I want to know that whether we have some fairness there also to see that, okay, I think it's also like dependent or kind of close to our other question about data market, whether everyone is being benefiting this platform in a fair manner or not.
Yes, fairness and federated learning is a big topic, which we didn't consider in my thesis, but there are a lot of methods, for example, what I mentioned with Pareto learning, where there is the idea, if you have a multivariate output, to find Pareto equilibria on the curve, depending on the profit of each data owner, where you could then, for example, pay to be in a specific position on this curve. And fairness needs to be evaluated, which we did not consider in these cases.
Okay. And what about a trade-off? For example, in case of differential privacy or maybe other techniques, maybe there is a trade-off that, okay, how much noise I add, depending how much privacy cost later I will have. or maybe in your case of energy community is different, how much benefit I will earn at. Do you think how we can find that trade-off, that sweet spot, saying that, okay, this method, this amount of noise or etc. is enough for the system, not just per individual?
For differential privacy, it's very nice. There are so-called momentums accountant, which basically give you, if you have this much noise, you get an epsilon, which is the privacy level, and common levels is like 1, 0, which would be like near perfect privacy, to 7, and there's no agreement on what to use, but basically these epsilon for differential privacy give you a trade-off between accuracy and privacy you can choose from. In the literature, everyone agrees on that there's no agreement on what is a perfect epsilon or which to choose.
But it depends on downstream task, right? Yep. If you know what your downstream task is, maybe you can close the loop. You can provide the feedback and then optimize epsilon, or maybe it could be the same in other techniques.
Yeah, you can choose for your specific use case. You can choose what epsilon you want to choose so that you have a benefit in data sharing and the level of privacy you desire. But there's not, or at least I don't know of a universal guide which epsilon to choose in which application.
Yeah, of course. But of course, it should be application specific, but maybe for any specific application, that trade-off can be found.
Yeah, it can be found, but for example, for voltage forecasting, the papers I've read, they all agree that currently there's not an agreement, and they test different epsilons ranging from 1 to 7, usually.
So what also, for me, a big question is incentive compatibility of the methods you generate, you develop. You talked about different attributes like explainability, interpretability, sorry, I don't know, verifiability, but you didn't talk about incentive compatibility, meaning that the method you use will not provide a way for competing farms to harm each other, right? By, for example, sharing, misreporting or missharing data and so forth. So, for example, in this case, that you have 10 farms. Maybe I can use, if one of the farms may use the privacy as a layer, as a way to share bad data with the rivals. So what about the incentive compatibility of your mechanisms? Have you explored it?
No, we have decidedly not explored them by choosing the semi-honest security assumption. And in this assumption, as baseline, we assume that this does not happen. So by choosing semi-honesty as baseline for all of our models, we excluded these cases from happening. But for example, techniques like zero-knowledge protocols, where you can verify that you have behaved correctly, would be able. So zero-knowledge protocols work in a way that while you perform the operations, I can later on prove to you that I've performed the operation correctly, but not reveal the result of my operation. This is a technique.
Sorry, Lukas, here I missed a bit. Sorry, incentive compatibility. Sorry, is that assumption, or is it hold by design in your methods?
In my methods, it's by assumption, because I assume semi-honesty, and therefore I assume that this does not happen. However, as Jeremy in his report, for example, pointed out, a natural extension would be the inclusion of zero-knowledge proofs. Here you can basically...
So, Lukas, may it happen that someone used this privacy layer for attacking the rivals? Could it happen?
For example, if we look at the trees, yes, I could, for example, try to report a false gain. And there are two options. Either I actually have a very good split feature, and I report a worse split feature. And then what would happen is you would more digress to the non-data sharing case, or I claim to have a very high gain. Like I want to own the split node to have everyone choose falsely. And this could also happen.
So Lukas, among the methods you work, is there any method that by design is incentive compatible?
I would not claim so.
Okay.
Inherently, without thinking more about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, now it's 20 minutes we discussed. If later I have more questions and if there is time, I'll be back. Otherwise, thank you so much, Lukas. Very, very nice discussion.
Thank you very much.
So thanks. Now we move to Professor Memmi.
Ah oui. Ah, voilà. Ah. Yes. I wanted to. Do you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to thank you to join Jala to thank you very much and congratulate you for your presentation and your work and the richness of your work, the number of examples, and I can say that I learned a lot. I will ask you some question around your methodology, around privacy, and also about a lot about your implementation, the code that you develop. I am curious about that. Actually, you don't describe a little bit. You don't describe the architecture of your code in your document, and as I am curious, I'm going to ask you a few questions on it. So that's 3 categories of questions. And first, I wanted to ask you about your use cases, and I think that I got the feeling that there are too many of them, and I would have just focused on 2 of them and make them sophisticated enough to, as Jalad suggested 1 moment ago, to go to the industry and to get some more insight about them and to have them just detailed enough to cover everything you want to analyze. So that would be a first question about the use cases. Why are there so many? And also about the evaluation of your experiment. Of course, the feedback is about the models and to refine on the model, but I was thinking about the consequence of the analysis could be about the use case themselves, and to have some insight and some information to improve them. For example, I see the example on the wind farm. Suddenly, because you have all those results, you understand that the next step to enrich the set of wind farms is not to have 1 more wind farm, but to add some wind turbines to 1 farm or another.
Excuse me, could you repeat the first part of the question? So why I used so many use cases specifically?
And not to focus on just 1 or maximum 2. Usually when a PhD student is enumerating too many that many use cases, he will, in the end, he will focus on only 1. But you don't, and that's my question. It was not preferable to have only 1 use cases, but to have it completely defined and to have it universal, kind of universal in terms of covering all the cases you wanted to analyze.
I will go argue from a backwards point why the different use cases we chose came from when we were discussing for the energy project. For example, we started with the wind farm forecasting because it's a common use case, and there was a state of the art on privacy preserving forecasting in power systems. And then when we were discussing academical discussions and looking at electrical vehicles, we realized that they have similar challenges, and then by analyzing the features, for example, we had the idea of, okay, and we have public features like daytime. So the analysis of the different use cases for me inspired the methods, and therefore got the ideas how to use. This is basically the reason was discussions about, okay, what can we do there, what are their specific characteristics, and what challenges do they pose. And this is why they are split apart. And I agree with you that you can probably find later on the techniques used, you could have found all in one use case, but this is not how we arrived there. And this would be my answer.
So I understand this is kind of historical reason.
Yes.
And what about this idea that your analysis not only after the evaluation steps, you can think about improving the model, but you can also think about improving the energy system itself?
For example, I would say for the wind farms, you could probably here, you could see which wind farms, if they want to engage in deeper correlation, have more potential or could perform deeper or more information sharing. And for the electrical vehicles, you can see traffic patterns. So for example, you could either identify these stations are very full, so maybe we need a new electrical station in that neighborhood, which would be of interest. Or for example, which we haven't done, but has been done for EVs, is that you can see residency. For example, you can see the movement between people who charge at their working place or charge at their home. And this is, you're right, there's a lot of depth to be covered in these use cases, but there was no time left to do.
This is exactly my point, Lukas, that all those experiments, they are useful for improving the use cases, and it is even more important than just improving the model from an economic point of view. About the methodology, Lukas, so I sent you some question about your feedback loop from the evaluation to the governance. And for me, the governance should be what is the more stable in your methodology, and to envision to have to modify it is almost a sign that you have to split somehow your governance in something that is very stable like a rock and something that can be changed by optimization. What do you think about these kind of things? Also about the methodology, you are talking in your document about some roles that are not in your workflow. For example, the role of the experts or the role of a central evaluator or a neutral participant. And I don't see it in the scheme, in the figures describing the workflow.
First, to your first point about the governance layer, in the perspectives, I put your feedback into account. I agree that maybe the governance layer could be split in more like you have the technical aspects. For example, I gave the example, you realize one party contributes more than the others and doesn't get the benefits, so they want to leave. If they leave, then what I have to find, a step of the governance layer, is to do feature selection and identify the available data. This you would need to repeat. However, this is a very technical point, and therefore one could say I split the governance layer, one in these rules, overarching rules, which are, as you said, probably very stable and independent of who joins, and then these technical questions which have to be changed. For example, if my most important contributor leaves, I need to do the feature selection again, because I have a completely different set of features available. And could you repeat your second question again?
The second is about some roles, like the role of expert or the role of neutral participant, and I don't see that in the methodology. I don't see that in the workflow, and maybe they should be taken into account at one moment in your workflow. Slide 11.
Yep. Yes.
Like I don't see anybody here like a neutral participant or an expert.
Yes, apologies. My neutral expert is what I called here owner public. This is the neutral party. I should have. I didn't choose the right name. And for the experts, it's small. These shortcut of combination is the combinations of expert methods you referenced to. I assume it's this comp. I apologize.
Okay.
It's very small written. That's maybe the reason why you didn't see it.
Okay, thank you for the clarification then. Next question is about adaptation, that you say that the model should accept the addition of participants, and I think that's the easy part of the evolution of a model. I think one thing that seems to me a little bit more touchy is the removing part of a participant. So that means that when you do what we call in cybersecurity revocation of a participant, it's always something complicated. Have you any idea about this point?
I would start with the second part, the removal. If we look at the federated trees, I would say removal is easier than adding, because if you remove a participant and their own nodes, you could just take the default direction for missing data. So either you would have either to retrain the complete model, or you take the default direction, for example, left or right. And as you saw in my resilience, at least for the use cases we studied, default directions are okay. And therefore, you could cut them out. They would lose the weight. We don't care. And then you just choose the default direction.
So that sounds about right. That for the tree, it looks like it is easier actually. That I was thinking, and maybe some other model it's more complicated.
Yes, for the Komarov ANOD network, for example, if you remove one of the local CAN, you would probably have to retrain as all. Unless they were pruned already, then you wouldn't have an issue. But if they were very important and most of the pruned edges would come from them, you would have to retrain or go from the fully connected CAN. And you could artificially prune all of them to remove them and then fine tune the remaining edges you have. This you could try. Yes, for adding participants in the joint global models, in the methods how I have proposed them, I think it's more difficult. Their horizontal federated learning is more suited, because there you could have the global model, which then can be either fine-tuned on the data of the new participant, etc. But in the cases how I made it, I would argue cutting is easier than adding for now.
So thank you, Lukas. So I understand that you have not looked at cryptanalysis technique to understand the flow of encrypted data that participant can see.
Yes, that's correct.
So that is for future work. I expect that because I have this feeling that in some situation, cryptanalysis should provide some answer, actually, and some of your models and mixing encryption and model machine learning should have some weakness, and I suspect cryptanalysis could uncover what you want to hide. It's a comment, it's not a question actually. I think you pick a full homomorphic encryption as one of the techniques for encryption, and have you considered a partial homomorphic encryption, where only some selected features, some selected functions, can be computed while the data is encrypted?
I did not use fully homomorphic encryption. I used additive secret sharing techniques.
Because you could look into this and you will get a little bit of speed, actually, for the same kind of protection. Yeah.
My idea was what I would like to look into for the secret sharing are two things. I would like to move to, let's say, fixed point additive secret sharing, and therefore gain the already existing proofs for information theory security. And because when you go project then on a higher ring, so you have a ring structure which is protective, and there I still have my multiplication, my addition, and my distributive law. For me, the key importance is the distributive law, which is difficult with, for example, as far as I know, Shamir secret sharing. And then to lower the threshold for secret sharing. So instead, because now I have a K threshold, if I have K data, so I need everyone, and probably by designing the splitting more intelligently, you could move to lower thresholds and therefore gain more speed and also gain resilience to attacks which interrupt communications.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of secret sharing, and it is well known that it is exploding in memory, right? So if you have n share, you multiply your memory by n. Have you looked into this question? And because that would suggest that this category of encryption is not scaling up in terms of amount of data that you encrypt and protect.
I concur. This is one of the key issues I faced in designing the models, and you could see in the benchmarks where I had to reduce the number of farms. I think one key approach here, once again, is the lowering of the threshold. So to design it such, for example, that I don't need n shares, but rather a lower amount of shares to reduce the memory needed, and what you also proposed in your report, more selective encryption. So to see precisely where do I need shares. How I addressed it in my code was that I very judiciously deleted every share whenever it became irrelevant. It was immediately deleted, because when you pass the tree to explain what you mentioned, the number of shares increases until you reach the bottom left leaf, which is like the highest number of shares due to instance spaces, and then it gets less. So I tested by seeing, can I reach this point, and where can I delete shares I don't need? And hence also the idea for the weights to have them stored unencryptedly, because if they were also shared, I would add additional memory burden. I concur with you, and my goal would be to employ lower thresholds for secret sharing and investigate more there into detail.
Thank you, Lukas. So I also suggested in my report that you reconsider a little bit zero knowledge proof, and to obtain explainability and and at the same time to protect the traceability of the exchanges. Have you given some thought about using some kind of zero knowledge proof? At one moment in your document, I read that you discarded because it is too slow. But nowadays we have seen a lot of improvement about this technique.
I've considered going basically to Jalal's earlier question for malicious actors. That would be very interesting to have zero knowledge proofs to verify always the correct execution of our model. Hence, I would combine these two questions, and I agree with you that this is a very interesting possibility to achieve a higher level of cybersecurity of the proposed model, and it's something I'm very curious to look into in the future.
And my last question are about the environment that you have developed. If I have a student who want to repeat your experiments, is there a possibility? Is your code open source, and have you put it on a GitHub somewhere, and is it accessible?
If you ask me in 3 months, yes. That is the next step. I'm currently working on both projects. For the Fusion CAN, it is in the contract of the Enfield project that we put it on the GitHub. And for the tree models, I'm working with another colleague to publish a package on it to also present all the use cases for reproducibility and display the code. I'm working on it to harmonize everything and put it in a proper way.
I was thinking about so many times you talk about the speed as being a critical criterion, to do your computation? And have you thought about parallelizing the code and, for example, to start in a kind of pipeline manner to do the encryption and then in another process to do the model calculation, computation, and in another process to do some verification? For example, have you given some thought about the architecture of the software that you have been developing?
I've given it small thoughts. I use multi-threading in the secret sharing multiplications and operations to parallelize all operations I can, or parallelize, for example, trees are very iterative, where you have to go over every party. And this I try to parallelize as much as possible. However, I think there is a lot of potential to gain in parallelization by better implementation.
Exactly. But sometimes implementation is important. Well, thank you, Luca. This is a very nice job, and I enjoyed to listen to your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we move to Dr. Fei Teng.
Thanks, President. Hi, Lucas. Really good work. So I really enjoyed reading it. I guess the part that I like most is actually you're not focusing just to implement some of these techniques, but also try to understand the framework, the structure. I think that's really informative. Maybe start from that structure, because from that structure, I have a feeling that what you have been doing is one more sequential, right? You decide the model, and then you decide encryption. So how eventually you close this loop? Just is that somehow the way that you use for preserving will affect your model selection, or how that's maybe explain a bit more how that can potentially feedback?
To precise that I understood correctly, thank you very much. What you mean is that what I do is I choose the model and what I want, and then I choose an encryption that fits. And technically, what could be that the encryption we then choose that fit could have been suited to a different model better.
Yes.
And yes, I concur. This also a possibility, or how our thought process was that I have these properties of coming from the governance layer, and then I need to choose the first thing. So either I choose model or encryption, and for my case, I said, okay, I know that for nearly every model archetype in the literature, there exist nearly all encryption methods. So for example, for tree-based approaches, so I choose the model archetype, and then I see, okay, I have these encryption options available, which suit my high-level properties. For example, we could argue that with secret sharing, what I did is or lossless encryption. Not necessarily, for example, this decision against differential privacy was made before choosing the model, because we said our use case in the governance layer wants lossless predictions. And therefore, we want to have encryption techniques which use losslessness. This would be like when you start from the encryption. And obviously, not obviously, but it has been shown that for differential privacy, you can design it in a way that you don't lose a lot of accuracy, of course. But in our case, we decided to focus on completely lossless encryptions. So it would be another path you can choose. Yeah, but for me, personally, the more intuitive path was to start with the model and then combine the model with.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wonder, maybe, I mean, like say this requirement on just how the combination of different protection would affect your model choice. I think that something can be investigated before afterwards. You mentioned about this. What you are implementing is not is lossless encryption, but which means it's already proved that not going to affect performance, right?
Yes, I give the theoretical proof, and then we test in an benchmark.
Okay. Yeah, because as long as it's theoretical proof, I guess there's no way it's. I mean, I just saying you show many benchmarks to say that actually it's fit, but if it already theoretically proved that's going to it's lossless, I guess to some extent, I don't see how it's possible to be lossy. I just think maybe that not need to be proved again, since that already theoretically proved this is lossiness.
And it depends on the implementation. For example, for secret sharing, if you use float 32, then you can perform the theoretically sound method, and I could see that the result wasn't correct. So I needed to switch to float 64 to actually achieve.
Why is that? Why that happens?
I think because of small rounding errors at the end. I tested in my GPU implementation where the default is float 32. And when I was summing up all bins, I could see that in one iteration that's parallelized and I add up all bins, the sum later is false. And therefore, I think this is due to numerical imprecision, and then I needed to increase the numerical precision. So while I agree that the theory is very important, this is why the verification, I think, is also necessary.
Yes, thank you. So I guess another question based on that is, since you both prove its lossiness and also in theory and practice, so which means with and without encryption, you get the same outcome, right?
Yes.
But on that basis, so what would be the encryption changes you need for interpretability or expandability? If you, I mean, many of the cases, how that interfering with, I mean, with and without privacy protection or without your encryption, how that change the needs of that? Is that going to be the same with and without it, or because you have this encryption layers that change the problem you're facing? I didn't fully capture that.
Okay. As an example, if you look at the trees again, here, the actual identity of the feature is hidden in the encrypted version. Therefore, if I cannot apply, for example, common feature importance methods where I sum up all features by their gain over all nodes, because the identity of the features is hidden. So I know node A belongs to owner 1, but I have no idea about the feature, which feature it belongs to. So you could do individual feature importance, like owner 1 can check by the nodes he owns, which is the most important feature. But globally, you could not if they don't want to reveal it. And therefore, you would need a method. For some encrypted trees, there are ideas to use indicator values at the bottom of the leaves. There's a paper which I will need to study more in detail, which explicitly wants to address this. But this, I would say, like depending on the encryption design, you have possible problems there.
Yeah, but in that case, you basically can only evaluate the group of encrypted data, right? You can't, if one users provide multiple information and then that's encrypted, so you can only evaluate that feature as a whole, right? Or the impact of that.
Yes, for the trees, I could evaluate the impact of each data owner. Basically, because
that's what I'm saying.
Each data owner.
You can't split.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was the idea for the Commonwealth Arnold networks, to be able to precise or be more interpretable while providing.
Okay, so that's basically make it more challenging, since you are combining features to evaluate their overall impact instead of in the without encryption. You can look into each features. Now you have to be looking at each combined features from each user, right? I see.
Yes.
Okay, that's different, but not necessarily more difficult. But I think that's quite different. Yeah. Maybe I have some general questions. Since you are describing the encryption layer, including all the privacy protection mechanism. So I'm not sure is that consistent in the terminology wise. Is that widely accepted? I never see DP was defined as an encryption technique. it's for you. It seems to be everything is you call that encryption. Yeah, your encryption layer, or should you use that privacy preserving layer instead of encryption layer? Because now you call all of them are encryption now, right?
Okay, I see. I mean, yes. I see. Okay. Yeah, terminology probably it would be better. Oh, you could say to add privacy preservation to your model, because yeah.
That's my question. If that's in the literature, they call them everything under encryption is fine, because my understanding of encryption is a particular type of technologies. I haven't seen anyone saying differential privacy is one way to do encryption. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, this I've seen. I've seen like as how to do privacy preservation, or like how to do privacy preservation. There are different options, A, B, and C, and usually it's like differential privacy, and then you have some multi-party protocols, etc.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I see more. Yeah. So that may be something you can consider. Yeah, I think that's yeah, I think that's probably. Let me just see what another thing is. I think you are mentioning, I mean, it's all terminology levels. So you are separating privacy and confidentiality. One is for end user consumer level. Another is the I guess the wind farm owners more concerned on their business secrets. So is this also accepted definition about splitting between privacy and confidentiality? Because you have to also consider the intersection between cybersecurity and privacy. Cybersecurity normally have one component is confidentiality, the CIA, integrity and availability. So I think this terminology, what do you, is this existing separation between large users or company level or consumer level when you separate privacy and confidentiality?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. It was in the discussions we had. We always used industrial data, so in discussion with LEK, that's the confidential data, like contractual confidential data, and privacy more for like the right to privacy of the individual. But I see your point when considering the larger picture. Adding cybersecurity, it probably needs to be defined more stringent, which term is used in which context and when. There, I concur with you.
Yeah, just some minor things, but it's sometimes it's. I think also overall one comment I have is you're not really separating between cybersecurity and privacy. So or how you, I mean, define the difference between cybersecurity and privacy, for example, because I think you sometimes put them in parallel, but sometimes seem to be saying they are same. I mean, they are same very close concept. So what do you, maybe the final question is what's in your mind about cybersecurity or relationship between cybersecurity and privacy?
For me, privacy is on one side can be seen as a subfield of cybersecurity. For me, cybersecurity would be a topic where on one side you consider you want to keep data private as privacy preserving, but you also consider different attack vectors, attack methods, interruption. So this you could see on one side. On the other side, for example, when you look at terms like cyber resilience, which is also being used a lot, which is the ability to withstand attacks, there I would not consider privacy as essential, but rather, for example, model properties like robustness of trees. What I discussed, like the resilience to missing data. If the data is missing because the wind farm is broken, or you have an interruption due to an attack, is the same. So this is, I think, I need to be more precise, but this is where I see like the parallel, because often cybersecurity is like cyber resilience, then I would not put privacy in it. But if I see like under the whole umbrella of cybersecurity, then I would put it under it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that's probably quite makes sense. Like where cybersecurity is bigger umbrella, and most of the case we are more discussion about malicious. I think you have good discussion about the assumption about attacks that may be separate classic cyber attack and also the privacy perspective. Okay, I think that's everything from me. Very good, Sis. Thank you.
So now we move to Professor Angela Meyer.
Yeah, hello. So thanks for your presentation and very interesting work. So quite a couple of questions have already been asked, and I've done something like 10 minutes, so I'll try and keep it a bit shorter. So first of all, it's nice to see all of this on paper, and then in practice, what would be needed let's stick with this example of wind farms and different wind farm owners, and they would like to have more accurate forecasts so they can better plan their production and trade and whatnot, and so they would like to kind of share the data to hopefully get more accurate forecasts. Let's stick with that use case. So what would be needed? I mean, what would be needed in practice to convince them to give access to, well, not to give them your data, to give you their data, but at least to let you use the data for learning? How would you go about this, convincing them? What arguments would you have, and what would you think is there for them to lose also?
To start first, how I would argue is on one side, where we have the theoretical results of higher performance, which is like, okay, why do I come to you? And then you would need to show a higher technical readiness, so to provide the framework, so to explain how the secure communication channels between these different wind farms, how the different data sharing types work, to provide a visual explanation of the data sharing proposal to convince them, and then to be able to give theoretical guarantees for cybersecurity. For example, as far as I know, the European Union, they're working on certifying like certain technologies if they are considered secure as not secure, and to therefore have this robust testing on cyber attacks, because for them to lose, while I assume semi-honesty, I will in a real-world application, you would not assume semi-honesty, especially in critical infrastructure, because people might want to attack your wind farms to cause issues, and therefore you would need to argue how to extend the methods presented to this case with malicious adversaries, and also there provide examples, in my opinion. And you could start on a test case with them where they present you with simulated non-private data, and therefore simulate the system from them and apply the methods to them to give them an impression of how would it work for them. And then while providing guarantees for cybersecurity and communication channels, etc., to then move forward with the implementation.
Have you looked at this? So have you made use of either simulated or real wind farm data and actually looked at a couple of cases and done some statistics also, not just, picking the best cases, of course, but done this over a year or two or whatnot, to see how much there is in terms of accuracy improvement for their forecasts, and then maybe you even know what that would mean financially, and then you could set this into perspective with the effort and the potential risk that they would have in joining your federated learning scheme. Can you comment on that?
So the use case we used was the GEFCOM dataset, where they had the 10 real wind farms for production, but we didn't consider more different wind farm datasets. I mostly used the GEFCOM dataset for benchmarking, and some for the Kolmogorov networks. You also simulated data to test on, but this data did not represent data typical for wind farms, but rather completely different data cases. So we haven't explored more different wind farm use cases, which would be interesting to verify the general applicability of the model.
So you have done one case, so like with one wind farm, or how? I didn't understand that.
No, apologies. With 10 wind farms, the GEFCOM case study, they provide data for 10 wind farms over 2 years, and this is what we used to evaluate the models. So we trained on all 10 on the multivariate case for 10 wind farms, and trained on the first year of observed data, and then predicted for the second year in a sliding window. But we only used the GEFCOM case study. We didn't use the different case studies with different wind farms.
And can you explain a little bit where that improvement comes from? I mean, how far are these? Why is it that it might seem simple at first glance, but maybe not? So why is it that one wind farm can learn from other wind farms when it comes to wind power forecasting at that single wind farm?
In my understanding, for example, it's the wind direction. So if you have wind, for example, coming from the east, and the one wind farm is placed more eastwards than the other, then if the wind speed changes, this wind farm will geographically notice the change first compared to the other wind farms. And therefore, the other wind farms can use these observations to anticipate in their next forecast the change in wind speed. Similar, a change in wind direction observed at that one wind farm can inform in the future the other wind farms. And this is how you can gain information. Or, for example, if there are large weather effects on different geographical scale, which can impact your prediction in future. For example, if you look at solar forecasting, we have cloud movements. Then, for example, you could infer the cloud movement from observing the production at different points, geographical points. And lastly, for the just purely from the machine learning aspect, your model will be able to generalize better.
Okay, I mean, so how far apart? What's the spatial, distribution of these 10 wind farms that you looked at? I mean, roughly, just a brief, short answer.
They're spread over Australia in this case. In the Jeff case study, there are some clusters where they're relatively close together, and in these clusters you can see the performance. When you analyze the NWP forecast, you can see that for some wind farms they receive the same forecast, so they're geographically close together, and for others they're very far spread, so there you will not assume relationships.
Yeah, because that's the question, right? Like if you, I mean, first of all, how representative is the wind measured at one wind farm for the wind at another wind farm that is several hundred of kilometers apart? And then also, even if there is a relation between them, that depends on the type of weather, right? Not every day is the same, and that feels on the wind flow field really. Okay, good. So, and then also, how do you make sure this is not just a bias correction, right? Because it could be that that there's a bias in the forecast for your single wind farm, and then with this learning, kind of you correct the bias of that wind farm, but there's not really an effect from let's say a benefit from ingesting the other wind farm's data. How do you know this is not just a bias correction, like a univariate bias correction for each wind farm?
That is a good point, which we have not considered. I've not considered. I've checked for the correlations and to see if when there are correlations between the wind farms, or for example, for the EV charging stations, to compare the univariate approaches to the multivariate approaches to see if you gain a benefit by including the data. What you could do would be remove single wind farms where you know there exists correlation to see if I just take all completely uncorrelated wind farms and see if then it already increases the performance a lot, and then take actually wind farms where I know their correlation to see if I get a benefit. But this we have not done.
Yeah. Okay. And then one other question. So let's say, I mean, I'm sure you're aware that there's curtailment, and sometimes there's also sometimes the SCADA power that is reported does not really maybe reflect the wind speed. So there's errors and also things that there's not always the data that you may have from one wind farm is not in every case a good representation of the actual wind at that wind farm. So let's say one of the wind farms injects, or several of them actually injects data that there's curtailment or there's maintenance going on, and there's wind blowing, but there's no power production. So how do you know, how will this affect the performance of your federated learning model?
For example, what you could do with the tree-based model in the inference phase, you could, if there's curtailment or if there is maintenance, you could treat this data as missing and then use the default directions of the tree model. So it would lower the probably slightly the accuracy of the performance, but you would not inject false data, but rather you would treat it as missing data and use the default directions in the trees to still perform inference. But yeah, this needs to be considered. There you could have, for example, a model which is aware of missing features. So you, instead of only training the one choice, you could have split points with two different feature options, and then you could replace them. But this is what I do with the default direction. So I would just choose the default directions and treat these data points as missing data, and choose the default direction instead.
Okay. Good. So maybe just one more question, and that is how can you have? I'm sure you've thought about this. What would be needed to implement this in practice, apart from, of course, convincing the wind farm owners or whoever, whatever application you have in mind, but apart from basically convincing the data owners to join, what would be needed, like for, let's say, who would orchestrate this process of learning the shared weights, and who would operate that? Would there be a server, and who would operate? So have you thought about these? Would it be mandatory basically for data owners to join? Or have you thought about these practical things?
For the model, the idea was that this is discussing this governance layer part. So you agree on how you want to pursue, and for example, by using the trees, it's now as an example, as it is a decentralized model, everyone would have to have their own computation capabilities, and then you would have to need to install secure communication channels between each data owner, and then you would also, on the implementation level, move from the single machine testing I do to a fully distributed setting. So you would need to modify the code to be a fully distributed approach, for example, with a multi-party computing, which we haven't done. And then you would not need a server or central coordinator, but rather you would have only communication between all these data owners, who then obviously need to have sufficient computation capabilities to perform their computations on their side.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My turn before moving to the supervisors. Thanks for the nice talk. I had perhaps some questions about the differential privacy that you. So we are on the good slide, I think, more or less, yes. So one question I had was, who is your, who you have in mind as attacker? So who is so you should defend your data from other participants, from the aggregator, from whom?
For the wind farms, on one side, the competitors. So because if you can get the statistical information, how, for example, they design their wind parks, or how they behave with certain wind conditions, you might infer critical information. And then on the other side, as we talk about our energy systems, outside attackers who want to attack the predictions, and therefore the forecasts are false, and you can reach grid instability because everyone reports the wrong foreseen production values, and wrong decisions are made based on this. Those are the two things coming to my mind.
Yeah. But then if you can trust the aggregator, couldn't you apply differential privacy at the aggregator? And so you put a much less noise and you get a better accuracy.
If in my, depending on the use case, yes. In my use case, I don't use an aggregator. I treat these individual wind farms as not connected by one aggregator, but rather as individuals. So therefore, I haven't thought about the case if I'm at an aggregator.
Okay. But how do they communicate? Do they? Everyone talks with everyone else? This is the way. Okay.
Yes, it's a peer-to-peer. So this was the idea, to have not a central coordinator who organizes.
But for example, there are some work that consider peer-to-peer, but on a given topology, where there is also a relation of trust among closer neighbors. That means perhaps I trust you more than someone else, so I connect to you. And then they look at this concept of network-wise differential privacy, because this also allows you to put much less noise at the local level. Okay. Don't know if you
ever. No, but we have not considered. Thank you very much.
And then one other question I had was, at one point you said that when you do value attribution to parties, for you, this is related to interpretability. Can you comment a bit more? Or was one of the slide?
Yes. Here, you mean this one?
Yeah, probably yes.
Yes, because what I mean is valuation to parties is to understand who is the reason why we do prediction A. So which party is, which features do we use to reach our predictions? And therefore, if this party level is like, for example, the party supplying most of the split points or most of the split points at the root of a tree, they have a higher value, or therefore they're more responsible for more value, and therefore the interpretability methods allow us to understand these relationships.
So can we say that this is very much related to the fact that you are considering vertical federated learning, and because in horizontal probably there will be no such relation between the
yes but in this case for vertical, yes, it's very much vertical focused and should be extended to horizontal as well.
And perhaps also related to this question, what if someone has very poor data? What will happen? You think what that will be removed from the tree perhaps, and so we still not have the problem to
for example, when you look at trees, or similar for the Konogov analog networks, if there, for example, in the sensitivity analysis, you see that all symbolic functions are completely independent of the data owner. They get a prediction, but you could also remove them. You could still provide the prediction, but the prediction is completely independent of that data owner. Similar, if your data owner doesn't own any split point, you get a prediction, but if the data owner is there or not, doesn't matter.
Okay. And so because you mentioned CAN, we can move to. So at one point you said you talked about verifiability, no? And you said I have a continuous function over a compact set, then I have a maximum and a minimum, no?
Yes.
Is it that enough to be able to claim that you have verifiability? Because or perhaps you can say a few more words about in which sense you have verifiability.
Okay, the idea, or what we define here, is the verifiability idea is to give concrete bounds of my range of outputs. So, and to be, for example, for neural networks, the problem might be in grid that you have violations of physical real constraints. So, for example, for the wind farms, this is known as power observations between 0 and 1. So my model technically, it is important for me to verify that my model would never predict 3, which I could cut. Maybe, but then if my model has specific input that predicts 3, I can assume that it hasn't learned data very well, and I don't know what would happen on unseen data. And if I can provide bounds based on the bounds of the input data I give it, I can provide give a better indication how the model will behave on unseen data by providing concrete fixed bounds. So, for example, here for this is for the combined forecast. We checked with different synthetic data generation, what are the output bounds of the cans. So what happens if I give you any data input, what will you predict? And therefore, to see the performance on unseen data, and for example, to verify that if I give a specific input in a specific bound range, then I will not get something else. For example, if you consider a backdoor attack, you could say, okay, this is the normal input range we expect, so the output range should always be in this case. And with the symbolic functions, now I can verify, okay, if I have this input range, do I actually reach the output range I would want, or do I get, due to the compactness, do I get suddenly a prediction which is outside of this bound? And this I can verify with the extreme value theorem.
Okay. Can we claim that it's a very, let's say, basic form of verifiability, because you can still have a very bad, you were talking about a backdoor. You could still perhaps should have predicted 1 and you predicted 0.
Yes, of course. It's a very, very basic.
Okay.
That's why I call it the first step towards it.
Okay. Then at one point you introduced this idea of encrypting only some features, no? So, and you provide this example. There could be a person who takes a public feature encrypt it, and this feature is very important because, for example, it's the time.
Yeah.
And now we can say, oh, this person is very important, and okay, and then you said, okay, so then we allow for some features to be public, and I think your argument to prevent this kind of attack was that because the bad guy can still encrypt the time.
Yes, of course.
But I think your argument was more like, but there will be also a good guy who has left the time non-encrypted, unencrypted, and then this guy will get the benefit. Okay, but what if this attacker has done something slightly smarter? No, for example, in time series prediction, often we take the time and we extract the frequencies. No.
Yeah.
And now I take the frequencies, I encode the frequencies, and it's just another form, and perhaps it's more useful than the time. And any ideas about how to?
I think there are two options. One option, which is based on domain knowledge, you could be, for example, I know, for example, for the time period, for example, for photovoltaic, I know that during night there's nothing, so I can get the certain behavior of the public feature, and then if the encrypted feature is very, very similar, I could always say, okay, if I get very similar value, it is always cheaper for the whole collective to always choose the public feature, which is not a detection or protection, but rather a very pragmatic approach. But I think you would need to do when you do the feature selection, you need to compare similarities, and you could define a similarity threshold. Like if your feature is close enough to these public features, we don't select your features, which is a very basic way and not intelligent, but needs to be.
Would it work in this example? Because I think if you look at time and you look at frequencies, I'm not sure it's easy to detect that they kind of transmit the same information. I don't know.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay.
I would need to think, but thank you. I will consider it and test.
Okay, thanks. And then, so at one point there was also an argument you had for the CAN again about. I think the argument was you can have an infinite number of ways to obtain this result.
Yes.
So there is no way you can get the correct one, no?
Yes.
More or less.
Basically.
And I was thinking, it's a totally different problem, no? But I was thinking at these attacks where you observe the message that, it's totally unclear. So you have the message sent from a client. So you look at the update, and then you are able to invert the update. And theoretically, there could be an infinity of possible input data that could have generated that update. So you launch an optimization algorithm, and you get one of these possible solutions. But then when you look at this possible solution, you recognize an image. These gradient inversion attacks. So you have a gradient that's been computed on a batch. You have this gradient could come out from a very different, you could, but it happens that when you optimize, you find something that is, you recognize the image, despite the fact that could be very different things that could have been there.
Yes, but in this case, the gradient connecting from the image of the local projection to the true data, you never see. This is computed by the local owner. You stop like the.
No, but perhaps my question was for it's not the same problem. But what I'm wondering is, you have an inversion problem where that is not, it's not bijective. So you say, okay, I'm protected because there are multiple infinite things that could go to one point. But maybe that if you try to do something, because not all of these infinite things are equally likely, may it be that you can actually get something that is very close just by, I don't know how by running what, but so I don't know. I'm not sure, because your data is not uniform over the possible space of data. I'm not sure that the argument there are an infinite number of possibilities really is a strong argument against inversion attack, because otherwise it will also be in the gradient inversion setting.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, for my understanding, to clarify, it's what you mean if I introduce domain knowledge in a sense, into the problem where I could cut the space of possible solution which makes sense.
This could be what
yeah.
is interesting into this gradient inversion attack is that we don't add this knowledge,
Okay.
but some way, you know, the gradient optimization finds out something that is very reasonable. So without putting knowledge, you know, about, but I you know, it's a stretch. I mean, I'm not saying that you're doing
in a sense, no, and since it would be like a not lucky guess, but what you mean essentially is, what if I get the correct combination or the correct answer and can recognize it's the correct answer somehow? That's a fair point. I think then you would need, you probably would need to modify or somehow protect the messages potential. Again, think about how to change the messages so that you cannot make or cannot apply this method to guess. But this I would need to think about and expand on. But thank you very much.
And then I had just one question, because we talk a lot about farm 2 and farm 8. So I was curious, but I'm not sure I found the right farm. But there is a picture of with 10 farms in your thesis.
Yes.
So figure 3.4.
Yes.
Any idea why? Because it seems that farm 2 is totally on the left, and farm 8 is somewhere in the middle. Any idea why farm 2 is so important for farm 8?
I was discussing with my supervisor. I'm personally not the biggest impact. We were discussing that there might be large scale weather effects. So that we have similarities at the same space, like similar phenomenon at both space due to something in the middle, in my understanding. But they're not just good expert. No, I see your point.
Because you have a cluster of 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8. So I was curious why this long range.
We're also discussing.
Okay, and then perhaps you know, you define a different level of privacy at the beginning, chapter 1. No, so you can have a 0 level of privacy, then you have level 1.
I quote a review who defines them. Yes.
So it's quoted.
Yeah, it's not my definition.
Okay. But I was a bit puzzled because of the first level of privacy. I mean, there is a 0 level, and then there is the first one. I'm not sure I've understood what refers to, because you kind of say that the global model is not known. There is no global knowledge, or no global model. There is.
I will also.
It's a page 21.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a basic protocol P1, keeping private data and models local. So I was a bit, I didn't get, because you say the global model is not revealed. But at the same time, you say that this will be the case of federated averaging in horizontal federated learning. So what?
Okay, yeah, this is not well worded. Thank you. What I mean is, for the basic protocol is that the data is being private, which we agree on, and then for vertical federated learning, we'll keep the models which contribute to the global model private, but for horizontal, this does not apply. Because
okay, for horizontal doesn't apply. Okay, then yeah, that makes more sense. And then perhaps one final question. I know that you briefly mentioned inference attacks. And so I was wondering, you know, so first, perhaps, what is your idea about the execution of the tree? No, when you finally need to do inference, there are different parts that needs to be executed at different nodes. If I keep looking at which parts are executed, cannot I some way infer something about the thresholds, the you know, what the distributions and so on?
You do not know what tree. No, you only in the inference stage. I don't have a picture of it, but so sorry, I'm going to show you with my hand. So if you are data on your partial tree, here you know your decisions, and then in the inference space, what I do is an indicator vector. So you make your decisions, and for every other node, you assume the decision you have made. So you start at 1, all leaves are possible. Then I go through. If I own the node, I can go say left or right. So it's, for example, if I go this direction, this direction, every subsequent leaf would be assigned to 0. here 1, and then this node I don't own, so 1 here, 1 here.
Okay.
And then I get an indicator vector.
Okay.
And then what we perform is an encryption.
Okay.
Everyone does it,
Okay.
or not encryption. I do it unencrypted, but these indicator vectors then are all multiplied.
Okay.
And by logic, there's only 1 left at the end, which was the extra part chosen. So you do not learn what the others do. You know for yourself.
Okay. So this is also some way encrypted, and you don't know what the decision every client is taking.
I don't encrypt the multiplications. Other contributions do.
Okay, but it's possible. Okay, it's possible. Okay, thanks a lot. And then now I think we move to your supervisor. So we start with Dr. Carla Silva Gonzalez.
Thank you. Hi, Lukas. Congratulations on the presentation and answers so far. Some context to the audience. I have had the opportunity to follow Lukas' work closely over the past years because I served as a rapporteur for his first and second year evaluations. And then this year I had the pleasure of hosting and supervising Lukas for a 5-month research exchange in our group at Tech in Portugal. And during this period, we developed the approach in chapter 4. And this experience gave me a deeper insight into Lukas' technical abilities, natural curiosity, and capacity to work independently and also collaboratively. And I think this is a very high quality thesis. Congratulations. I had a long list of questions, but I just checked. So now I ended up with probably 3. So for CAN models, you have this pruning strategy that basically consider the L1 norm of input and output per node. Did you consider or read about other type of strategies that could end up with simpler expressions? Because when we started, we thought, okay, CANs, they are interpretable, that's so nice. And then the expressions were really extensive expressions and very complicated. So do you think there is a pruning strategy that would fit better?
There probably is. I think the first step what I would do is change the parameters. So meaning that I prune differently in the local CAN and the fusion CAN. An idea would be to prune harsher in the fusion CAN where you have the fully connected layers and prune less in the local layers to possibly derive more concrete the temporal information at each node or at each owner, and then to have less connections between the data owners. Another approach could be to maybe use pruning similar to adjacency matrices and graphs where you find out the relations between the different owners and therefore use it for pruning. But this I have not explored, so it's I would like to try in the future, but I haven't done yet.
Okay. And do you think it would be easier to introduce some kind of human knowledge? Let's say I want to train a CAN, and I know that the relation between wind power and wind speed should be this formula of wind speed power 3. Then what is going as input is U and V. So do you know it would be easier to force some part of the tree to have human knowledge formal?
So this would be similar to physics informed learning. I think one could try with different symbolic libraries. However, when testing on the synthetic data with noise, when choosing at least the same CAN structure as the original CAN, which generated from symbolic functions, it didn't produce the same symbolic functions. So that might work, but I'm not sure. You could try basically to, for example, for wind speeds to have like cubes and to see if it works, but it should work by limiting the library. However, what they do in the CAN package, you can choose a different factor where you limit the functions based on interpretability. And in testing, this has not proven to be beneficial for accuracy at all. So I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, to try if maybe to use very specific, like you said, for specific relationships that's known, to try there, I think is interesting.
Okay. So also related with the mixed encryption, there is this problem that maybe someone can try to attack. And let's say we have a data market on top of the collaborative forecasting model, and then they can try to encrypt calendar related data. So do you have some type of regularization that could be used to regularize public features in a way? Because, for example, in La Sauvar, we can apply a different regularization on public
Encrypted data.
Is it possible in your trees, for example?
In the current implementation of mind trees, no other pruning parameters, but you could weigh in the what you could do is, if you look at the gain equations where you have different split candidates, you could apply multipliers to these gain equations, and therefore you could weight features differently. I don't do it, but you could, yeah, you would add a multiplier to the gain equations depending on the type of feature, and therefore you could scale down or scale up the possible gain of this proposed split, and therefore you could decide influence which features get chosen.
Okay, so that's all from my side. Thank you. Congratulations.
Okay. So now we move to Simon Kamal.
But Lucas, so yeah, I don't have specific questions. I think we posed a lot of them in the previous days. So just I congratulate you for your very good work. You know, when you started this PhD, the solutions we had for data sharing, they were still, at least for privacy preserving data sharing in the systems, they were not really scalable, were a bit lossy, and now you know you managed to explore the two sides of the coin. So first, understand the needs of power system actors, the practice of predictive analytics, forecasting, and those, by the way, are far from being universal. So to pinpoint one general use case is not easy. This is why maybe we had several. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, but keeping the dialogue with the theory, with the other disciplines. So now, in the end, you have a very collaborative PhD. You have all the tools that you can further improve. I think the discussion was very good. So I thank all the members of the jury for discussion today. That's all for me.
So to George.
Yeah. So I would like, from my side, I don't have questions. I would like to congratulate for the very nice presentation, and also for this, the 3 years of collaboration. I think you have been very steady in your target and work in a very constant and intense way the whole 3 years. I think it's the results are very interesting, so we will try in the next period to consolidate with publication, etc. But I think this work on data privacy and confidentiality data sharing started actually in the frame of Smart Forest project, and then with the challenge of early kid, etc. And I think now we come with your work, we come to a point where we have a clear view about the methods, about what can be needed, how to put that in place. The fact that you consider so many methods gives a good idea of what you need, what options you have on the table, and what to select. So for me, especially the second chapter about the governance very important, because you know, when you have a multidisciplinary topic with a lot of literature, etc., somehow you need to organize the work, and this is a nice contribution that will help us, especially for the follow-up of our work. So once again, I would like to congratulate for your perseverance and steadiness in the research work you have carried out, and the enthusiasm and the curiosity all these 3 years.
Okay. I think at one point Professor Jalal Kadzempur said that perhaps he had another question or a few questions, but so I don't know if.
No, actually, I'm good. I think all the discussions with other colleagues, they all covered all my questions. So yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. If there are no other questions, I think there is a habit to ask if someone in the audience who has a PhD has questions for the candidate. Okay, so if not, perhaps we can close here and we move to the.
Maybe I have a last question, Joven.
Yeah, go on, please.
So, do you know what you are going to do after the thesis, Lukas?
I can give you the short-term forecast for the next 3 months is to stay here and, well, as discussed, to finish the publications and write the 2 packages of the code used in my thesis, because it's currently spread over multiple projects and different iterations. So to give a compact, nice code. And then I have up until now decided that I will now decide what to do in the future. I would like to continue working in this field, but how I have not yet decided, to be honest.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion. It was very interesting, very informative.
We move to the. Yes, so to the jury member, you have received an email from George with a different link to which connect for the deliberation. Okay, see you there.
Thank you for the discussion.
Just judged by the direction of the jury. How would the answer come? Yeah, that's the same with them. I think the other one was with the most the other one very from my perspective. Yeah. It was interesting. Yeah, but I think it's expectation that we have more. Yes, I don't think it was another case of engineering, so more practical theories.
Now we're asking for the percent. You're into saving, but there was not setting boundaries. There was setting back. I think. But there are people who don't have they can also all the same.
It's a
Did you see a lot of the saving shops?
Yeah. No. I think it's this is actually extremely expensive. You export those, but they're very cheap. Some of them are very cheap. I really don't think. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they were next to us.
I think should go there. That was nice. You have
Yeah, Celine gave it to us. So.
Yeah, everyone was sort of
We can start.
Yes. Thank you for the question. Very interesting. I will think about it. Yes, yes.
Take a picture with
I'll be yes, sorry.
Okay, we are back here for the announcement of the results. So, okay, we have the members of the jury who are on.
Okay, so we read our report. Mr. Lukas STIPPEL, during your defense, the jury found that you gave a very clear and well-structured presentation of your PhD thesis. The slides were well organized and easy to follow, and allowed us to fully appreciate the breadth and depth of your contributions. We found that this high-quality presentation complemented the manuscript, providing additional elements to understand your contributions. The presentation provides a comprehensive overview of your research, which addresses the challenge of collaborative data sharing and learning in multi-actor energy system under strong confidentiality constraints. You presented the structured framework combining governance, model design, privacy-enhancing technology, and evaluation criteria to enable predictive analytics. Building on this framework, you developed and evaluated the encrypted federated learning approach, particularly tree-based models and Kolmogorov-Arnold networks that balance accuracy, interpretability, trustworthiness, and confidentiality. Your work further investigates mixed encryption strategies and decision-focused learning to improve scalability and operational performance with extensive validation on realistic use cases such as wind power forecasting. Through the presentation, you demonstrated a strong ability to connect real-world industrial problems with advanced mathematical and algorithmic techniques. Your work illustrates a level of scientific maturity and your capacity to conduct advanced research while taking into account practical and industrial constraints. The jury also noted that your research opened a promising perspective both for further theoretical development and for applied extensions, where the proposed methods appear particularly relevant for operational deployment in energy systems. The defense was followed by a long and demanding question and answer session. The questions covered a broad range of topics, from detailed technical aspects of the proposed methodologies, implementations, and numerical results, to more high-level considerations such as the integration of the proposed solutions into data market, the role of incentive compatibility, and their potential relevance for energy system operators. The discussion spanned multiple disciplines, including energy systems, security, privacy, and machine learning. Throughout this session, you demonstrated a very deep understanding of your research field and of the broader context of your work. You answered the questions with confidence and clarity, and you are well aware of the strengths and limitations of the methods developed. You demonstrated the solid understanding of the implications of the underlying assumptions and have a clear vision for how the work can be extended, for example, toward confidentiality preserving data markets. Overall, you showed to be both insightful and intellectually curious. Your command of the state-of-the-art is impressive, and your ability to extend it through original and well-founded contribution is particularly commendable. These qualities clearly indicate that you have the potential to pursue an excellent career, whether in academia or in an industrial research environment. For all these reasons, the jury unanimously decided to award you the degree of Doctor in Energy and Processes of Paris Sciences et Lettres Université, prepared at MIN Paris PSL under the auspices of Doctoral School number 621. The jury warmly congratulates you on the quality and the achievements of your doctoral work. Congratulations. Now I think you need to read the sentence.
Okay. I'm gonna take the English version. In the presence of my peers, with the completion of my doctorate in engineering and system processes, energy engineering and system processes engineering, in my quest for knowledge, I've carried out demanding research, demonstrated intellectual rigor, ethical reflection, and respect for the principles of research integrity. As I pursue my professional career, whatever my chosen field, I pledge to the greatest of my ability to continue to maintain integrity in my relationship to knowledge, to my methods, and to my results. And now, like Dr. Sergio, before I would like to say thank you first to the jury and my rapporteurs for taking the time to read my work and ask very interesting questions, who sparked a lot of ideas, especially Jalal and Giraffe for taking the time to read all of these pages and continuing the discussions we had 2 years ago at the DTU Summer School about whether you should just sell all data or not. Thank you very much, Jalal and Giraffe, for the cybersecurity energies. Also to thank Angela for very interesting questions in areas where I would like to learn more and need to think about more how to do. And similar for the jury members and president, Giovanni, thank you very much for the very interesting question about how to continue with confidentiality. And now to my supervisors first, with Carla, where I spent the last time in Porto. Thank you very much for these 6 months, I think 6 months, and later collaboration here. And it's a very insightful state. I really enjoyed the maths discussions. It was very fun. And also for the CSI reports, for the feedback that you and also Faye in the first year gave. And yeah, Josh and Simone, thank you very much for helping me to guide my very nonlinear thinking into a more streamlined framework, which one can call science. And yeah, thank you very much for that and all the guidance throughout the 3 years, especially in like visual, how to structure and how to perform science, and coming from maths into power systems to introduce me to power systems, where I had not a lot of ideas from and learned what it means that it's not a forecast variable, but a power output of a wind farm, which was very insightful. And yeah, also thank you very much to my family who came here, to Olya, Ariano, and Julia who came from far away, and Loris, sorry, he was close in France. Yes, and all my friends here, to Sergio, Eleni, Costas, Dario, Tara, Joey, and everyone else, Aurora, Claire. Thank you very, very much for these 3 years. They were very interesting. I learned a lot and made very great friendships and relationships.
Okay. Yes, that's all.
That's all? Okay. Congratulations, man.
Congratulations.
Good then. Yeah.
Congrats, Lukas.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to this. Thank you very much for today and taking the time to discuss and read my work. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
again to the jury, and have a nice evening and weekend.
Thank you, George. Thank
Thank
you very
you
much.
for
Catch up soon,
assuming
huh?
perfectly the role of the president. And
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Enjoy. Bye.
Yeah, for everyone who's here, there will be, I don't know, in a couple. I'm ready soon. Yeah, there will be a joint poll from Sergio and me, where you can taste Colombian and German food and enjoy the celebration.
Nice fusion now.
And yeah, we even coordinated with different parts. Yes. Voilà. Thank you very much.
Congratulate you too. No?
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.